Lieutenant Brian Zack had seen the worst of humanity, but nothing could have prepared him for the night he met her. 2-year-old Kayla was a ghost of a child, broken and silent, but her tiny hand reaching out would change his life forever. Lieutenant Brian Zack wasn't just a name on a badge. It was a label etched onto a man weathered by years on the force. His sandy hair, once vibrant, was now streaked with premature gray, mirroring the countless calls, the endless parade of human misery he'd witnessed. His blue eyes, though still sharp, held a perpetual weariness, a shadow cast by cases that refused to fade. He'd always been dedicated, driven by an almost naive belief in justice. But lately, the city's underbelly had begun to chip away at his idealism. There was one case in particular, a specter from his early years, that haunted his sleep, a little girl he couldn't save. He wouldn't speak of it, but the memory was a constant, dull ache. The call came in on a Tuesday, just another night shift drowning in the usual cacophony of the precinct. Dispatch crackled over the radio, a disembodied voice relaying the details. Possible 273A, child abuse. Address is 14 Maple Drive. Brian sighed, the familiar knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He acknowledged the call, the words feeling heavy, stale. Another night, another broken child. He tried to muster his usual professionalism, but a wave of fatigue washed over him. The house at 14 Maple Drive was a testament to neglect. Peeling paint clung precariously to the clapboard siding. The lawn was overgrown, and a single, flickering porch light cast long, ominous shadows. The air hung heavy with a sense of despair, a palpable silence that spoke volumes. Inside, the scene was even worse. The living room was a chaotic mess of discarded clothes, empty food containers, and broken furniture. Other officers were already there, their faces grim, along with paramedics huddled around a small figure in the corner. Brian approached cautiously, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs. And then he saw her, Kayla. She was huddled beneath a tattered blanket, her tiny body trembling. Her clothes were dirty and ripped, and ugly purple bruises bloomed on her pale skin. Her face was a canvas of fear. But was her eyes that stopped him cold? They were wide, dark pools reflecting the harsh fluorescent light, filled with a terror so profound it was almost tangible. Yet, amidst that terror, Brian saw something else, a flicker, a tiny spark of hope, searching, reaching. He knelt down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Brian. I'm here to help you." He extended a hand, palm up, an offering of safety. For a long moment, she didn't move, her gaze fixed on his face, assessing, questioning. Then, with a small, hesitant movement, she reached out. Her tiny fingers, so fragile they felt like bird bones, curled around his. The contact was electric. It wasn't just a physical connection. It was something deeper, a silent plea, a desperate grasp for something solid in a world that had crumbled around her. A wave of emotion, raw and unexpected, washed over Brian. A fierce protectiveness, a burning anger at whoever had done this to her. And something else, something he couldn't quite define, a feeling that resonated deep within his soul. At the hospital, the sterile environment did little to ease Kayla's fear. She clung to Brian, her small body pressed against his side. The doctors and nurses worked efficiently, their faces masks of professional concern, but Kayla remained silent, her eyes tracking Brian's every move. She wouldn't let go of his hand. He stayed with her through the examination, the x-rays, the hushed consultations. Skull fracture, brain bleed, dislocated elbow. The words were clinical, detached, but they hit Brian like physical blows. Later, as Kayla drifted into a restless sleep, Brian found himself in the hospital waiting room, staring blankly at the television. Wreck-It Ralph was playing, the bright colors and silly antics a stark contrast to the grim reality. He watched as Kayla, her eyes still wide with a lingering fear, became captivated by the movie. A small, hesitant smile played on her lips. It was a fleeting moment, a tiny crack in the wall of trauma she had built around herself. But it was enough. In that instant, something shifted within Brian. He saw her not just as a victim, not just as another case, but as a little girl robbed of her innocence, deserving of love and safety. The memory of the girl he couldn't save surfaced, the guilt of familiar ache. But this time, he thought, this time would be different. He would save her. That night, back home, the silence of his own house felt oppressive. He found his wife, Sierra, in the living room, reading. He sat down heavily beside her, the weight of the day pressing down on him. He told her about Kayla, his voice thick with emotion, the words tumbling out in a rush. He described the bruises, the fear, the tiny hand clinging to his. I want to bring her home, Sierra, he said, the words barely a whisper, but filled with a conviction he hadn't felt in years. Sierra, bless her heart, didn't even flinch. She knew him, knew the depths of his compassion, the quiet heroism that lay beneath his sometimes gruff exterior. She'd seen him bring home stray animals, offer help to strangers, reach out to kids on the street. She'd seen him haunted by the ones he couldn't save. She simply nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. Then we will, she said softly, her hand reaching out to cover his. They talked late into the night about the challenges, the uncertainties, the potential heartbreak. But beneath it all, there was a quiet determination, a shared belief that this was the right thing to do. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings with social workers. The child welfare system, while well-intentioned, was a labyrinth of bureaucracy, a slow-moving machine that seemed designed to frustrate. Brian and Sierra navigated the maze with a mixture of frustration and grim determination. They learned that Kayla had no suitable relatives, no one who could offer her a safe and stable home. The possibility of her ending up in foster care, lost in the system, was a constant, gnawing fear. Then came a call. Brian answered it, his heart pounding. The social worker on the other end of the line was direct, almost apologetic. "Lieutenant Zack," she said, "we've exhausted all other options. We've been unable to find a suitable placement for Kayla. Would you and your wife be willing to take her in?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Brian didn't even need to look at Sierra. He knew. "Yes," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "Yes, we will." Bringing Kayla home was like bringing home a wounded bird. She was skittish, wary, her eyes constantly darting around, searching for threats. She barely spoke, her voice a soft, hesitant whisper when she did. Nightmares plagued her sleep, her small body thrashing, her cries muffled in the darkness. Brian and Sierra were patient, infinitely patient. They created a safe space, a haven of warmth and love. They didn't push, didn't demand. They simply offered, consistently, unconditionally. Slowly, painstakingly, Kayla began to heal. A tentative smile here, a shy giggle there. The first time she called Brian Daddy, it was a whisper, barely audible, but it hit him with the force of a physical blow. Tears welled up in his eyes, tears of joy, of relief, of profound gratitude. The legal process was long and arduous, a seemingly endless series of court dates, home visits, and interviews. But Brian and Sierra fought for her, fiercely, relentlessly. They were her champions, her protectors, her family. The day the adoption became official was a day of celebration, of tears and laughter. Kayla, dressed in a bright pink dress, her hair adorned with ribbons, clung to Brian's leg, her eyes shining with happiness. She was no longer just a child in need, a case number, a victim. She was Kayla Zack, beloved daughter, cherished member of a family. Years passed. Kayla blossomed. The fear in her eyes faded, replaced by a spark of mischief, a zest for life. She excelled in school, made friends, filled their home with laughter and the joyous chaos of childhood. Brian, watching her grow, felt a sense of peace he hadn't known he was capable of. He still carried the scars of his past, the memories of the ones he couldn't save, but Kayla had healed him in ways he never thought possible. She hadn't replaced the lost girl, She had mended the broken pieces of his heart. One day, Brian found himself driving past the house where he'd first met Kayla. He pulled over, the engine idling, and stared at the dilapidated structure. It was empty now, boarded up, a silent monument to a dark chapter in his life. He sat there for a long time, lost in thought. He realized that he had finally found closure, not in forgetting the past, but in accepting it, in learning from it, in allowing it to shape him into the man he had become. He had forgiven himself. Brian and Sierra continued their work, their quiet acts of kindness, their unwavering commitment to helping those in need. They knew that they couldn't save everyone, but they could make a difference, one child, one family at a time. And Kayla, their bright, shining star, was a constant reminder that even in the darkest of nights, hope could bloom, love could conquer, and healing was always possible. The future stretched before them, full of promise, full of love, full of the simple, profound joy of family.